Hello world and true believers. This is Brenda, a lost Aspie girl, and I wanted to make today's video about indirect speech. And but before we even get into that, I just want to say that there's a lot of good comments out there from like Jordy John and Kaj and Naysayer that I want to get back to, and I'm sorry I haven't answered them yet, and also and a few others, and also there are other videos I want to make, like on ego, which, but I have to think about that a little bit more. And I want to remake my whole Foxy Frog story, like video from Girl Warrior, and talk about that. And on top of it, I want to talk about my other two partially written books called A Neurotypical Axiom and Human by Proxy, Aspie by Nature. So, and I'll get into those in another video. But for right now, I think it's more important to talk about indirect speech a little bit because I've been thinking about that a lot lately. And, we've talked about us being mind blind before. And I think that's one component of the confusion that we run into, the fact that we're mind blind and literal on our side of the equation. But on the other side of the equation is the fact that neurosocials are indirect. And they don't always necessarily feel that they're indirect. So, what I want to do, like I like to do, is give some anecdotal accounts of myself, like that I've run into. Then kind of restate my theory and everything like that, and then kind of try to deconstruct it a little bit. And I think that indirect speech takes a couple of different forms with neurosocials, because sometimes they do have direct speech, but it manifests very differently than us. Their direct speech is usually targeted for optimum impact. Like I have a cousin who's like that. She always talks to us. She's very direct, but her directness isn't trying to get her to understand other people to get her understand herself. It's usually she's making some commentary on somebody else. And this, I'll get into on ego, and the fact that a lot of times the neurosocial ego is very invasive. So they're always like, like making, like someone will tell them something about themselves and they'll give them unsolicited advice or, make some kind of judgment or commentary. And they're like, and she always says like, I'm just telling it to people straight, but she's not, she's saying it. It's actually kind of catty. And in a way it's aggressive, but it's also passive, because if someone says something to her, she's like, they shouldn't have told me this about themselves, or they shouldn't have done this, and then I wouldn't have done that. And that's how she kind of protects herself in that. And I think that's very interesting. And I think that we're direct. Like sometimes we will, and the form that it takes for us is a lot of times we'll point out if someone else is wrong, but it's not because it's actually, but our intent is not to make a judgment on somebody else or whatever. It's just because like I said, like in that meeting with that boss who was wrong, I didn't want him to get in trouble, and I didn't want other people to have wrong information. The other thing that will happen sometimes, and even this used to happen to me in meetings, is if someone uses the words that will kind of misdirect me. Like they'll say something and I'll get confused for a second, and I'll be like, I think they meant this, and I just want to be sure because I don't want to get it wrong. And I'll be like, did you actually mean this? And they'll say, please don't correct me. And I'm like, I'm not trying to correct you. I'm just confused. I'll try to give you some example. Like I remember one time, like even something as small as a typo, and this is why people could be like, why do you correct your typos afterwards? I'm like, because I don't want other people to get confused and be misled by something I've said. I don't actually care about the typos themselves. I'm more worried about clear communication. I don't know always how to explain that to our socials, because I know they don't get it because they're able to fill in the blanks, but I have difficulties like this. And a good example is like one time I was texting somebody about going dancing. And I always talk about how I like to dance in my apartment. And they texted me and they're like, yeah, next month we'll go dancing so you don't have to dance around your partner. And I was like, what the fuck does that mean? Like, do they want to play cowboys and Indians and dance around? Like, I was so confused. I was like, what are you talking? Like, what do you mean dance around? And they're like, no, I meant dance around your apartment. But it was just a typo, but it really confused me. And I was like flummoxed for hours, like trying to figure out what it was they were trying to say. And I don't think that happens as much for neurosocials. They'll assume it's a typo and then ask what it is the other person meant. But for me, sometimes I'll think that's the word that they meant because they didn't go back and correct themselves. So that's why, like, I'll go back and I'll correct myself, and the other person's like, you didn't need to do that. Like, why are you doing that? They think it's like some kind of weird insecurity thing. I'm like, it's not. And I get tired of trying to explain it. I just don't want you to get confused by what it is saying and think I'm saying something that I'm not, Because I also did something I've noticed that usually no matter how precisely you choose my words or whatever, that doesn't even really matter, because neurosocials a lot of times get meaning out of something I'm saying that isn't even there. And I'm going to get into that too. Okay, so there's those two different forms of direct speech, because like another form of that, like someone thinking that they're being direct, is I was talking to somebody online not that long ago, and they said to me that they were gonna email me at 3 o'clock, and I didn't know where they lived. They knew I lived on the East Coast. I was like, what standard time are you? And they didn't answer with the with their time zone, and said, they said my time minus 2 hours from yours. And so I was like, your time minus 2 hours from mine, Eastern Standard Time, which is 3 o'clock. So that would be 1 o'clock for them, and 3 o'clock for me. And when they didn't email me by like 3:44, I was like, you're late. And they're like, no, I told you it's 2 hours minus yours. So that would be, and then I realized like I just took their words very literally, but they didn't think that they were being misdirected. In their mind, they were being very direct. And I find that very fascinating, because like things like that will confuse me and it will mislead me. So there's that. But I also think another form of indirect speech is storytelling, because we use storytelling to give context to whatever we're saying. Like whenever I tell you guys a story, it's like I have a theory about something, and then I give you anecdotal evidence about myself, or like observations I made about maybe my niece or nephew or other people in my life, or a story I read or a movie I've watched or something like that. But like I think that, but the thing is that a lot of times when I'm having conversations with people that are neurosocials and I tell a story, they'll somehow think I'm sending them a message. Then it'll be the wrong message. They'll think like I'm like if I tell them about books that I read. Like I was telling somebody not that long ago that I read a bunch of books on men trying to control women, and somehow like, and because I had gotten delusional until 2013 due to reading these books, and because I thought that maybe men were doing this, and I had some bad experiences. And this person took it as not only me saying maybe that I thought they were trying to control me, but that I was trying to play games. And I was like, where did you get that? I didn't say anything like that. I was telling you I got delusional in 2013. So, and partially probably it's because I read these books, and I read these books because I've had these bad experiences with these men. What does it have to do with you? And how did you get from that I'm playing games? So like, it doesn't matter how precisely I choose my words and how much context I give a lot of times to a neurosocial. If I tell a story, they'll take something away from it completely. And even when that happens and I say, why do you think that? They're like, oh, like they'll say, you didn't get what I just said right. And this is what I love about technology nowadays, is you can take a screenshot of something someone said and send it back to them. And even when you do that, they'll still say, that's not what I meant. And I'm like, then why did you say that this is the exact line that you said? And they'll still spin it. But when I was younger and we didn't have texting and email and everything like that, someone would say something and I would remember it and I would say, you said this. They would say, no, that's not what I said. And there was nothing, I had no documented proof, so I couldn't even argue it. And I think that's another component of involuntary mutism. It comes from like indirect speech, either people misinterpreting what you said, or when you interpret someone says, and maybe you interpret it correctly, but they don't like that you have, and then they do that whole revision thing. You don't know how to argue. How can you argue back? You can't, right? But even now, even with technology, you can have those screenshots and stuff and show the person. They still like won't. It doesn't matter. Like I said, it's that whole thing with my sister and my mom when they're arguing about the distances, and then I had the GPS and I tried to show them, and they just looked at me like I was crazy. That kind of blows my mind sometimes. I also think, so we use storytelling that way to give context, but people will still think we're trying to send an indirect message. And what I've realized over the years, it's because that's how they use storytelling. When they're telling it, like maybe we'll tell a story, like those of us on the spectrum, to a neurosocial, and then they'll actually, like the way we do with each other, they'll actually share a story with us, but it won't be related to what we've said. You know what I mean? To us, it will seem random and weird. Like I'll tell a story about something, and then they'll tell a story and it'll be completely unrelated. And what I realized is, it took me a really long time to figure this out. But I realized what happened is that I'm telling a story to give context and to help them understand me. They're taking something out of it that's not there. So they're telling me a story to send me a message, an indirect message. But the thing is it's so much harder to figure out. And a lot of times when I confront them with that message, what I think they're trying to say, they'll either deny it or whatever. And I'll never actually even know what they're trying to say to me with the story that they've told me, because it doesn't actually usually help me understand them, but it will be telling me something and I won't know what, and it will be very, very frustrating to me. There was once that a woman actually did explain to me what the story was. Like, I told her a story about me, and then she told me this whole story about these people that she knew, and like, I was like, what? Why are you telling me that? And she was like, I just want you to know that I don't want there to be any drama. I was like, I don't understand. It was very confusing to me, but like, at least she explained it to me, and she told me, and and I kind of thought that was what she was trying to say, and at least she was very forthcoming with that, and that was very nice of her, and I was very appreciative of that. But I think a lot of times, neurosocial, they'll think that they're being very direct, and they'll even say like, I'm just take what I said at face value, but I'm like, but if I take your story at face value, it doesn't tell me anything. I don't know why you shared that story, because it had nothing to do with what I just told you, and it doesn't tell me actually something about you. So I'm not sure why you told me that story. But then they'll be like, why, like, if maybe like we'll get to the point where like, why do you think I've told you that story? And this happened with somebody last year, and I'll say, I think you told me because of this. They're like, no, that's wrong. I'm like, then why did you tell me that story? And then they're not ever able to tell me. And that's confusing, because I think that first we can tell someone a story and say, oh, I'm telling you this story because of this. Is giving you content. I had this experience and I wanted you to understand this is why I do it. Because a lot of things that we do in our lives are observations. We want people to understand us. But more often than not, these stories that they tell us, they're a message. And I don't even think that they necessarily always even realize that they're doing it. And I think that's very interesting, and I think that's where the confusion comes up, because once again, not only do we process information, but when we convey information, it's in very different form. And even no matter how much we can tell a neurosocial that we're literal, they will always read meaning into what we say, no matter how concisely or precisely we use our words. And I think that's very frustrating for us, because like, we want people, we say what we mean what we say, and we don't want people to think that, and they'll think that they're just getting the meaning of what we're saying, because they'll like, well, that is what you said, and I'm like, where did you get that from? What I said? And they won't be able to tell you. I'll say, I said this, I said this, I said this, and like, how did you get anything other, like, you told me you thought I meant this, like, how did you get that from this, unless you thought I had a hidden meaning? And it'll be the same thing the other way around, where they'll tell you a story and you'll after a while you start to realize they're trying to send you a message, and it's difficult for us. And I think that's part of the reason why we like to read literature, because in literature it'll give us context for these stories, and it'll give us some kind of perspective, so that when people do this, we can start to figure it out. The problem comes is that when you confront the neurosocial with what you think that they've said, they're more often likely to deny it, because they don't like that. They didn't want to say to you directly whatever it is that they were trying to say. And now that you've been direct with them, they feel uncomfortable, and they don't want to own up to it. And that's very difficult for us, because it's confusing, and now we're kind of lost, and there's nothing we can do. And how can you argue against that, right? So, so that's why I think that the indirect speech comes in those three forms. It comes in, there's direct speech, but it's usually targeted for optimum impact on the other person. But usually, more often than not, I think that neurosocials use indirect speech, which is story form to send a message, or the words that they use are taking shortcuts, and they don't actually mean what they actually say. It usually means something else, and usually neurosocials are able to understand each other, or maybe they even misunderstand each other a lot of times, but they don't ask each other and they don't check in or whatever. Because one of the things I've learned to do is I ask people to repeat back to me what I said. Like, if I say something to a neurosocial, what I'll do a lot of times, I'll say, what is it you think I just said? And they'll get very angry with me and say, I'm not a child, I know what you said. I'm like, well, then just tell me. Like, I'm not doing it to do that. It's just more often than not, when I convey something to someone, they'll misinterpret it, and I don't want there to be any misunderstandings, and they'll get very upset, and they don't want to do that. And that's confusing to me. But I'll do that with other people, and they appreciate it. Like, someone says something to me, I'll say, I think that you said this, and then they'll say, no, this is what I meant, and then it's clear so I'll be able to, that helps me understand what other people are saying. But neurosocials and there's tons of books out there on active listening, and it does work. But neurosocials do not like doing it, and I think that's why the books are written. And that's confusing to me. Like, why not? If you want clear communication, then it needs to be clear on both ends. The person who's speaking, but the person who's listening. And if the person who's listening is unsure that of what they said, then it's good to repeat it back to them. So if the person who's saying something to you says, "Hey, what do you think I just said?" Just repeat it back. And in fact, I actually appreciate it when people ask me to do that, because I do have auditory processing problems, and I know what will happen if I'm paying it. And Jordy John has talked about himself. This has happened with himself and with his daughter, that if he's in the middle of doing something and someone starts talking to him, he won't be able to process it. And that happens to me. Like, I'll probably be doing something and someone will say something to me, and I know that I'm supposed to make whatever sounds to let them think that I heard it. I'll be like, yep, yep, yep. But I didn't hear anything. And so, like, I'll actually ask people, and they'll get upset and they don't want to do this a lot of times. I'll say, if you say something to me, just say, "Hey, what did I just say to you?" And then force me to repeat it back to you, because it does two things. It shows you that I understood what you said, but it also forces me to remember it, because now I have context for it. I've actually had to repeat it back to you, and that forces that kind of helps me to overcome my auditory processing problems. But people, again, don't like doing that, and that's very interesting to me. So I hope that I don't know, like I said, always, like, if I've got anything wrong, like, for anybody, or if anybody has any feedback or additional stories about something like this and they want to share with me, whether you're neurosocial or on the spectrum, like, please let me know, because I want to get this right. Like, I told you guys, I'm writing about this for those books, and I want to make sure that I get it right. And and if you guys have any ideas for additional videos, let me know. All right, Roger, over and out. Toodles, bye.